Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
As we watch the aftermath of the hearings, and the headline on the terminal says it all, Trump's Fed pick draws Democratic fire at confirmation hearing. Of course, we're talking about Stephen Myron, someone we've spoken with more than once on this program as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House. A lot of questions about Fed independence and the idea that this revolving door would keep swinging. One, by the way, that Myron himself criticized before, the revolving door between the Federal Reserve and the executive branch, knowing this is just a 4.5-month term that he's up for here. And he's not resigning his chairmanship. He'll be returning to the political position at the White House after this is done. So there are a lot of questions by Democrats, namely about Fed independence. And Senator Elizabeth Warren, who we just mentioned, she joined us last evening to give us a sense of where she was going in this conversation, went straight for Myron and his relationship with Donald Trump. Let's listen.
So let me ask you the question for the third time. We want to understand your independence. Donald Trump stated that the BLS faked the job numbers before the election to try and boost Kamala's chances of victory. Do you agree with that, yes or no?
The Bureau of Labor Statistics did not take corrective action to improve the quality of steadily deteriorating data.
Do you agree with the statement that they faked numbers?
I believe that they were complacently allowing the data to continue.
Do you have any evidence that they faked numbers?
Well, as I said a moment ago, the data have steadily deteriorated in quality, and I'm happy.
Okay.
This, by the way, this approach was tried by several Democratic senators, including Chris Van Hollen. I'm pretty sure they never got an answer. Bloomberg's Michael McKee is in Washington to cover this hearing for us, our international policy and economics correspondent, and joins us live now from Capitol Hill. Did we ever get an answer to that question, Michael?
We never got an answer to that question, nor did we get an answer to the question of who won the 2020 presidential race, because Myron dodged that question as well from Elizabeth Warren. But basically, the Democrats pointed out the inconsistencies in his testimony and the inconsistencies with the paper he wrote last year that suggested major reforms at the Fed, including a 4-year prohibition on anyone going from the Fed back to a presidential administration. And obviously, he wants to go back after a 4-month hiatus at the Fed. He had no explanation other than it's a short term. So I would go back. But it was an effort by the Democrats to hold him accountable, and they probably did if the court of public opinion mattered. But in this case, it's the Republican senators on the committee who matter. And they basically gave Myron a pass on everything. And it looks like he will be reported out of committee to the Senate floor.
Mike, when it comes to that question of Fed independence, this kind of drum that Myron has been banging for quite some time, how does he suggest he can ensure independence?
Well, he sort of he made the case that he would use his own economic training and his own beliefs to come to the conclusions he needed to about what monetary policy should be. He didn't separate what his own beliefs were from what the president's were. He was asked specifically if he believed in the president's views that he articulates so often on Truth Social about cutting interest rates, and he just also danced around that question. So it's pretty obvious that Myron would go to the Fed as a reliable vote for the president, but one could make the case that there are reasons to vote for a rate cut, as Chris Waller and Mickey Bowman have said. And so it's kind of hard for Democrats to score too many points in that regard.
Well, so give us the real take, Michael McKee, the purpose of this exercise, knowing that we have a Republican majority. Was this just about getting the poison out? Or will anything come from these clashes with Democrats? Is he as good as confirmed?
He's probably as good as confirmed. It's hard to believe that the Senate wouldn't vote for him, given that most of the members of the committee expressed their support, gave him softball questions, didn't seem to really care about anything that the Democrats raised. There were no follow-up questions from the Republican side. And the president has basically ordered the Senate to get him on the Federal Reserve Board by the time they meet September 17th. There are going to be calendar issues for the Senate floor action because they have a lot of nominations backed up. But if the president wants it, the Senate has shown they will give him what he wants.
Mike, you know me. You've known me for a while. You know I'm a markets girl at heart. So naturally, my favorite part of the testimony was when he was asked whether the bond market is pricing in or reacting to or considering the Fed independence is really at risk. Myron saying it's not, and that's not a real kind of scenario that would even show up. The natural follow would be, isn't that a done deal? Isn't Wall Street already saying Fed independence is not a thing anymore?
Well, it depends on whether you're in the administration or not. For Myron, he can say it's a theoretical question and I can't answer these hypotheticals because that hasn't happened. There are people on Wall Street who think Fed independence has been compromised, but we haven't seen a huge reaction in the markets. We've seen what may be the beginning of that. But right now, it seems that the markets have made their peace with the idea of a 25 basis point cut, and that's keeping the long end pinned, the short end pinned down, rather. The long end is exhibiting some concern, but not what you'd expect if they thought that the Fed had gone completely off the rails. That may still be out there.
Michael, it's great to have you in Washington, as always. Michael McKee, live from Capitol Hill. As we add the voice now of Claudia Sahm, we've been looking forward to this conversation in the wake of the hearing. Chief Economist, New Century Advisors. Claudia, it's great to have you back with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. What were your thoughts listening to this back and forth over Fed independence? Would confirming Stephen Myron for the board actually change the story here, knowing that he plans to go back to the White House?
So it was a pretty wild hearing. It lived up to expectations. This really wasn't about Stephen Myron and his ability to serve as a Fed governor. It was about Federal Reserve independence. And very specifically, what that means is who is in control of the interest rate decisions. Is it the president or is it the Federal Open Market Committee? Right? We're at, and that's this big question mark. And we've seen a whole series of events that have kind of pushed us in the direction of this White House really trying to exert a lot of control over interest rates. And to me, in Myron's hearing today, it is absolutely the case, and he said this as well, presidents, when they nominate someone to the Fed board, it's someone whose views they agree with, right? Like that, the president does have an influence on the Fed. This is not some pure, totally devoid of any political contact. But there was more to this confirmation. And what to me was the real shocker was the idea that the White House is going to send him to the Fed and keep him on staff at the White House, which, a pretty clear reading of the Federal Reserve Act says that is not okay, but it just fits within a series of actions that really are pushing us towards a Fed that's under the control of the president. And that to me, that action was one that really caused concern, not the back and forth about, he's been in politics and he'll be independent. Those are words. That's it.
Well, Claudia, if we can dive into perhaps some of the policy and some of the kind of proposals that he was suggesting that very much have aligned with what we've heard from the White House broadly. The one that stuck out to me is the fact that he said there's no inflationary effect when it comes to tariffs. He was pushed about whether tariffs are taxes. His response was any policy can be modeled as a tax on Americans. As an economist, is that true?
Yeah, see, this was part of the hearing that was really complicated in that, Myron right now is the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. He's part of the White House. Part of his job is to defend those tariffs, right? That is not, when he would be at the Fed board, that is not his deal. It's how do you react to these tariffs? It's not selling them. He got questioned time and again about these tariffs, and he got really very few questions, if any, about his views on monetary policy. What do you think the neutral interest rate is? What do you think? You're not going to have a political official stand before Congress and throw under the bus the president's key proposals, right? That was, Democrats were asking these yes/no questions to get him to, he's not going to do it. He's in the administration and he's also a presidential appointee, right? So I think, fine, whatever. He did a lot of hedging. He, tiptoed around issues. I didn't appreciate when he tiptoed around some that I thought were very directly about the Federal Reserve, but it was a strange hearing.
Well, Claudia, we are less than 24 hours away from a jobs report tomorrow. And I feel like the closest he got to discussing the labor market and even discussing those dynamics was talking about immigration. And he connected the dots between the immigration policy, the White House's border policy, and inflation when it comes to housing. Can you just connect those dots for our global and our political audience, frankly, about how that relationship should work in theory?
Right. So I think absolutely going into tomorrow's employment report, we should be thinking a lot about how much immigration policy has changed in the United States in just the last few years, because these big declines in immigration in the country, a rise in deportations, that should be showing up in terms of slower job growth because we have less labor supply. There can be other things going on, but that will almost certainly be present in tomorrow's numbers that we can't read it out easily. Myron was talking about the inflation effects, and here, he was highlighting the how fewer people coming into the country. There's less household formation. There's less demand for housing, so that'll help push down house price inflation. Totally fine. What he didn't mention is it's also the case that immigrants come, they work, they help deal with labor shortages and keep, wages from really exploding and then potentially have that passed on to consumers. So my read and what I think the different Fed officials have talked about is on inflation, it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of exactly how immigration sorts itself out. In the labor market, it's a pretty clear it's going to slow things down in terms of our workforce, which means it's pretty clear it's going to slow things down in terms of our growth as a country.
So, Claudia, from your perspective, we've heard from folks on both sides of the aisle. We heard from Elizabeth Warren on the show last night. We've heard from plenty of Republicans in the White House as well. Everyone's saying the economy is receding. Things are slowing down. Recession is right around the corner. From your perspective, where are we?
So I would agree that things are slowing down. I do not see a recession right around the corner. I am watching very carefully what's happening in the labor market because that will be decisive and, whether things really start to go south quickly. There were several policies that as we could expect to have slower growth from. Those tariffs, they are a tax. And that slows things down, at least in the near term. Maybe far in the future they create production, but they're going to slow things down. It's a tax. We've had less immigration. That slows things down. We've had a lot of uncertainty. That slows things down. So it's a question of where do we go from here? Are these very temporary effects? Are they ones that deepen? So I think that's the question we're in right now. I see much slower growth than we've had in recent years. But I don't see the falling off the cliff, but I think it is appropriate for the Fed and everyone else to be watching that risk carefully.
Tomorrow's the first jobs report since President Trump fired the head of BLS. There was a lot of talk about the quality of data in this hearing today. Stephen Myron would not acknowledge questions, refused to answer questions about the political motivations that President Trump had ascribed to the head of the BLS. How are you going to look at the data tomorrow now that this has taken place? And will the markets second guess the number they see?
I'm going to look at the data like I always look at the data. This is the absolute best read that we have on the U.S. labor market. We have world-class statistics. Yes, they can be better. Anything can be better. But they will give us a good read. It's going to be complicated, but it is not complicated because our data are falling apart. It's complicated because the economy is complicated. When we have these moments where labor supply is moving one direction, labor demand's moving in, it's really hard to read the data. And so I think tomorrow I'm just going to be looking at lots of pieces, keeping an eye on the jobs numbers, keeping an eye on the unemployment rate, looking at wage growth. You really have to look at all these pieces. And, we never take one number and run with it. That's just how it works in terms of measurement. But I have no qualms about spending a lot of time sifting through the data and trying to answer the question of where are we headed? What's going on?
Well, you wonder in the coming months, we'll see how the Trump administration handles the data. If this sends more people to private research, if ADP starts to rise on your list of credibility here versus government data, I know it's already a cottage industry, but are more economists going to be looking at private research because of this? The using other data sources has been a growing trend for a very long time. And that's not just
that's not necessarily about data quality coming out of the federal statistics. It's also sometimes you want a more granular approach. You want more timely approaches. Those are just not things the government statistics have been able to offer because, frankly, they're cost prohibitive the way that they do their work. And so I have no problem with the going out. But the idea that we're going to be, I don't think we're not there yet. But any time that is spent trying to figure out or the government data fabricated or somehow, like, that's just going to be such a waste of time. And I don't, like I said, we're not there yet. There's no reason to do that. But I mean, we really should recognize for what this is. This is going to undermine the federal statistics that we have that, while could be improved, are really very valuable. So I don't know. We're not in a good place. This is pretty risky.
Yeah. Keep this in mind at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Claudia, Sahm, what a pleasure to have you always on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for the insights today following the Stephen Myron hearing. Chief Economist, New Century Advisors, and some food for thought ahead of tomorrow's jobs data. Of course, we'll have that live for you when it breaks at 8:30 a.m.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta in Washington. Dueling hearings. We've been dealing so far with the hearing for Fed nominee Stephen Myron, but in a separate hearing room in the United States Senate today, the Senate Finance Committee, we found RFK Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, in what was a very chippy conversation. In fact, downright confrontational, with yelling by some Democratic members and the Secretary himself. If you look at some of the back and forths with the likes of Senator Elizabeth Warren, Mark Warner, who incidentally is going to join us in the late edition of Balance of Power, you'll know what I mean. But even some Republicans had words with Secretary Kennedy, including Bill Cassidy, a doctor, of course, from Louisiana. Shouldn't be a big surprise, but even John Barrasso, Wyoming senator, part of the leadership, got into this idea of vaccine policy and keeping promises that were made during his confirmation hearings. Let's listen.
Secretary Kennedy, in your confirmation hearings, you promised to uphold the highest standards for vaccines. Since then, I've grown deeply concerned. The public has seen measles outbreaks, leadership of the National Institute of Health questioning the use of mRNA vaccines, the recently confirmed director of Centers for Disease Control and Prevention fired. Americans don't know who to rely on.
Pretty important to be coming from that Republican in particular. We're going to be getting some insights from Dr. Leslie Kantor from Rutgers School of Public Health in just a moment, but we want to set the baseline and stay on Capitol Hill in a quick conversation with Bloomberg's health reporter Jessica Nix, who's in the Capitol for this hearing, which, by the way, just concluded about a half an hour ago. Jessica, it's great to have you on the beat for us here today. This was a bipartisan affair in questioning RFK Jr. Did he dispel any concerns about his approach to health?
That's a really great question. It didn't really seem like he did dispel any of those concerns from the Democratic side or even on the Republican side. One of the most interesting points of the entire almost 3-hour-long hearing was different Republicans who brought up Operation Warp Speed. Kennedy obviously has cut different contracts for mRNA vaccines, has said that he doesn't really trust mRNA vaccines in the past. Even Cassidy brought up, how would you even consider Operation Warp Speed a success for Donald Trump if you're saying this about mRNA vaccines? So we saw that rift within Republicans and Kennedy for one of the first times since Kennedy has taken on HHS secretary.
Well, just to clarify for our audience, at the end of the day, does this policy or do these recommendations or views that he's making clear in Washington actually show up when it comes to when someone goes to a pharmacy and ultimately asks for a vaccine? Have we seen that trickle through just yet?
Yes, we have, specifically with COVID vaccines. If you remember a few weeks ago, the Food and Drug Administration changed COVID recommendations to just people who are 65 and older, or if you have an underlying condition. unless you have a prescription from a doctor. Then you're able to go to a pharmacy and possibly get that vaccine. But it's created a ton of confusion about where you can get the vaccine, if you can get the vaccine, if you can just go to your pharmacy like normal. And a lot of his decisions have also trickled down to important vaccine panels, specifically the one with CDC called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. They kind of set the tone for what insurance companies cover vaccines and also whether vaccines would be offered for free under different federally mandated vaccine programs. They're changing vaccinations as well and policy with vaccines too. They've got a meeting, very highly anticipated meeting coming up in literally 2 weeks, also to discuss the COVID vaccine, RSV vaccines, MMRV is also on the schedule, and then of course COVID, which is the one that everyone's very confused about right now.
Yeah, I know Senator Bill Cassidy was urging them to postpone that meeting. Jessica, it's great to have you. Many thanks. Jessica Nix, Bloomberg health reporter, live on Capitol Hill as we add the voice of Dr. Leslie Kantor, chair and professor at the Department of Urban Global Public Health at Rutgers University School of Public Health. Doctor, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's been some time and it's good to have you back as part of our conversation. It feels to me like more questions were raised than answered in this hearing today. Do you agree?
I agree that it was a very contentious hearing. I think the thing that is very clear and very concerning for those of us who care about public health and the health of the American public is that we have essentially an HHS secretary who is decimating their own agency. What we know beyond the confusion that is being sown about vaccines is that thousands of CDC employees, even if we just stick with the Centers for Disease Control for a moment, thousands of people have been fired. We now do not have a director who is qualified at the head of the CDC, and we've had several high-level resignations of key scientists and leaders. So that is something that has certainly happened and was not resolved by today's hearing.
Doctor, can you just explore the hypothetical for me here? In the case of another pandemic or another wave or another variation of the COVID infection, what is the actual policy here? As you suggest, with the scientists, with the heads of these departments gone, what actually happens operationally to deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, well, you didn't have me here to terrify people, and I don't want to speculate too much on what another pandemic could look like. Obviously, that would be an extreme situation. And frankly, in terms of COVID, we got lucky because, in fact, the mortality rate was relatively low. If we did get hit with a disease that had a higher mortality rate, we know we lost millions of lives in the United States. It could be worse. But let's stick with what's happening right now, which is frankly bad enough, which is that we are losing in many communities what we used to call herd immunity, but we try to call community immunity for things like the measles. So we've had more than 2 times the number of measles outbreaks this year as we had even just a year ago. And 1 in 5 kids under the age of 5 who got the measles ended up in the hospital. So that is something that's happening right now without any further changes in policy. So I think we have to be very worried about a committee of now wildly unqualified people changing the vaccination schedule even more.
I want to ask you about Susan Monterez, who, of course, was at the head of the CDC and was fired by RFK Jr. There was a conversation in this hearing today about why. And I first want to mention the fact that ahead of this hearing, Monterez wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Those seeking to undermine vaccines, she writes, use a familiar playbook, discredit research, weaken advisory committees, and use manipulated outcomes to unravel protections that generations of families have relied on to keep deadly diseases at bay. Once trusted experts are removed and advisory bodies are stacked, she writes, the results are predetermined. That is not reform, it is sabotage. RFK Jr. today talked about the need to fire Susan Monterez because she lied to Americans when she said she was fired for refusing to adopt or endorse vaccine recommendations that were not supported by science. Did she deserve to be fired?
Of course not. And what's ironic here is that for the first time in our history, the director of the CDC actually went through a Senate confirmation. And many people were skeptical about Dr. Menarez and whether she would just rubber stamp some of these unscientific changes to particularly vaccination policy. When she would not do that, RFK tried to fire her. He's not actually authorized to do that, and the White House followed up. You have multiple high-level career scientists who are saying the exact same thing. There's absolutely no reason to doubt Dr. Menarez's explanation, and I think that she is pointing toward exactly what has happened here. Secretary Kennedy has started an organization and has been a vaccine skeptic and underminer for a long time now. And he now has a much larger bully pulpit and, in fact, is overseeing, ironically, the organizations that make vaccine policy for this country. I think, like most of my public health and healthcare colleagues, 20 leading organizations today asked for him to step down, including the American Public Health Association, and I am certainly in agreement with that being what would be most appropriate given the actions of the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kantor, we've seen that skepticism manifest most realistically and in real time when it comes to the COVID vaccines. But can you just walk us through the other places of the healthcare policy that is in the United States right now where you are starting to see that show up?
Sure. I mean, I mentioned one already, which is in the measles outbreaks and the worries that people have about the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. I think COVID is a very important place that we know that many people do remain vulnerable, including people like healthy pregnant women. And the American Academy of Pediatrics actually has now broken with the new guidelines from the federal government and said that children up to age 2 absolutely need to be vaccinated. So that is another place. And I think more and more we are hearing about parents who've heard a lot of this rhetoric opting their children out of certain vaccines. I think the most concerning public policy development was out of Florida yesterday when they announced that for any vaccines over which the Florida Health Commissioner has jurisdiction, which is not all of them, they will no longer be required for schools. So I just want to remind people that vaccines are not just about individual immunity. We need a large proportion of people to get them, or else a disease can take hold in a community.
Mm-hmm. But Dr. Kantor, if I went to a CVS or a Walgreens across the street, would I be able to get a vaccine if I asked for it?
Depends what state you're in. So, for example, I'm coming to you from New Jersey, where I'm very proud to say that many pharmacies are continuing to make COVID vaccines available to anybody who is eligible and without a prescription. In some states, they are requiring people to have a doctor prescription. Some states are working to make sure that their head of the State Department of Health can act as that sign-off doctor. But then there are sets of states where pharmacies believe that they're going to have trouble getting reimbursements, and they've announced that they are not going to make COVID vaccines as available. So this is becoming not just 2 Americas, but potentially 50 Americas, where your access to the vaccine may depend on your own state and their ability to develop workarounds.
50 Americas. We could invoke that vision on so many days here on this program. Doctor, thank you for being with us. Dr. Leslie Kantor, Chair Professor, the Department of Urban Global Public Health at Rutgers University's School of Public Health. Really interesting conversation. We're going to continue to unpack this hearing with RFK Jr. on the late edition of Balance of Power, in a conversation you will not want to miss with Senator Mark Warner. The Democrat from Virginia loomed large in that conversation as voices were raised specifically over the COVID-19 vaccine warp speed and the number of people who died in this country. The secretary refused to give the senator a number.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
A happy kickoff to football season. I should say that as well to my good friend Kailey Leinz. She must be so excited at home with the family. And I mention that because this is the preeminent season for sports gambling, right? Football brings the dollars. And there's a tie-in here, don't worry, to what's happening in Washington. Because now that lawmakers are back in town, they're going to be attempting to do a little bit of a fix on the president's big, beautiful bill. Don't worry, I'm going to connect the dots here for you, because as you might have heard, and we've talked about this a bit, the bill changes the way tax deductions work for gambling losses. You're only allowed to deduct 90% of your losses. It used to be 100. And so there are big concerns about what this means for the business, whether you're on the Las Vegas Strip, you're on Fremont, whether you're gaming on your phone. This is a massive growth industry. You hear us talk about DraftKings and all the rest on here. You can't hide from sports gambling. And so there is an attempted fix here. The representative from Nevada introducing the Fair Bet Act, which would return the deduction back to 100% of losses. So we'll see where this goes in the days and weeks ahead. But it's something we wanted to talk about with a true stakeholder. Derek Stevens is the mayor, essentially, of Fremont Street. He's the CEO of Circa Resort and Circa Sports, and is known for having one of the coolest sports books in the world. You've seen pictures of the pool out there. This is where producer James goes when he's in Las Vegas. They actually get in the pool. The sports book is outdoors with this massive... Derek, it's great to see you. Am I describing this pretty well so far? Because I've been looking forward to talking with you, and I want to know if this legislative fix is going to help save your business.
Yeah, I think it's going to help. It's going to help save a lot of the industry. Our business is one of them. But I think simply when you look at what happened in the big beautiful bill, there was an element that occurred in the middle of the night that was unintended. It's simply an unintended consequence. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Neither Republicans nor Democrats want this to occur, because effectively what it's going to do, it's going to take people that bet frequently, some of the large bettors, some of the professional bettors, and even just some of the larger recreational bettors, and you're basically forcing them to no longer bet legally. You're forcing U.S. citizens to go offshore and bet illegally. Under the current situation, the ability to deduct 100% of your losses is very, very important. Under what got passed in the big, beautiful bill, you'll end up getting taxed on a substantial amount of phantom income. And people that want to make sure that they file an appropriate tax return are being forced to bet outside the country. And that's very unfortunate, because it's going to impact, it will impact all states that have regulated gaming. It'll impact a lot of Americans that just don't want to do that.
How much time do you have to fix it? And by the way, I should mention that Derek Stevens also owns the D in the Golden Gate. He's got a couple of major businesses here. How much time do you have to fix that before it actually potentially impacts business, or is that happening already?
Well, I think everyone's working on it behind the scenes, but I think there's going to be a reconciliation bill that's going to have to come in December. The big, beautiful bill does not go into effect until January 1st. And I think the elimination of this 90% deductibility and going back to where we were with the 100% deductibility, that's going to be one of many things that comes into this reconciliation bill that will have to take place at some point in December. U.S. House Representative Titus has, as you had mentioned, has implemented this proposal for the Fair Bet Act. It's gotten bipartisan support. Also, in the Senate, we've got bipartisan support from senators as well. This is just something that needs to be put into a bill so that we can go back to where we were. The impact, I think, is a bit misunderstood from a political perspective, because it would have a big impact on the handle within every state that has legalized sports wagering in the country.
Interesting. Wow. Well, there's a lot at play here, and I'm assuming that you're talking to Representative Titus and the senators that you mentioned. Have you been lobbying actively with your representatives here in Washington?
Sure, we've been talking with Representative Reschenthaler. We've been talking with Representative Titus. We've talked to a number of senators, Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Masto, and I feel very comfortable that I think people are now getting to the point where there's enough awareness that people are raising their eyes and saying, "Oh my, this is not good." I think everyone understands that. It also impacts the number of recreational individuals that happen to go to casinos. The only ones that win out of this deal are the illegal bookmakers. Every state loses in this deal. Every state and every legalized sports book, as well as the U.S. consumer. So this is one that just needs to be fixed. It's very black and white. It needs to be fixed.
You make a pretty good case, and it sounds like you're not too nervous, I have to admit. There's something else, Derek, I'd love to ask you about. A couple things while you're here. It's a pleasure to spend time with you on Bloomberg. There's something else in that big, beautiful bill. It's no tax on tips. What does that mean for your employees and just for service workers throughout Las Vegas? Was this a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good idea. I think the implementation, there's going to be a few hiccups on the implementation, but certainly I could tell you, Las Vegas is a very good representative area, within the country to talk about no tax on tips because it's the highest percentage of tip compensation of any city in the country. I could certainly tell you for our employees, they're very excited about it. As the details came out with the $25,000 maximum, that's still very, very impactful. I could tell you, I mean, I think this is something that's going to help spur the economy on because this money is going to get spent or it's going to get reinvested. Our employees are excited about this thing kicking in. They actually initially thought it went in. It went in about a month ago and got real aggressive and started asking about why were they still being taxed on tips. But after going through an explanation saying no, this is gonna happen on January 1st, I could tell you there are hundreds of thousands of people that are excited about this, and I think it's going to make a big impact in their daily lives.
Mm-hmm. What's going on with business in Las Vegas right now, Derek? We've seen a drop in visitors for 6 straight months. I was just there in April, as a matter of fact, and it was packed. I was in line for everything that I tried to do, and I wonder if there's a difference between the Strip and Fremont, or if you're just seeing a different story than the narrative out there. Is business on the upswing or not?
Well, it's interesting question. When you see the headlines that's saying that visitation's down, that's true.
Right.
Visitation's been down, anywhere from 3% to 10% month over month, but that's by bodies. When you take a look at revenue within, let's say for example, the state of Nevada, with the Gaming Control Board, revenue is up. The month of June, the numbers came out, and in the month of June. Overall revenues in downtown Las Vegas up double digits. Overall revenue on the Strip up 3%. So revenues are up, yet visitation's down. So this is kind of where I think you're seeing a little bit of a bifurcation in the U.S. economy. Right now, I would say the middle high to high end not impacted. It seems to be very, very strong. It's down at the lower middle that's being impacted, where the cost of inflation's taking their toll. The cost of transportation, the cost of a flight, cost of hotels, and I think that's the segment that we're missing in Las Vegas, but really in tourism in general. I mean, it's the same situation when you take a look at the tourism board in Hawaii. Take a look at how tourism is impacting New York, Miami, and such. It's really the lower end that's kind of getting hurt. And the one thing I would say though is I'm a bit hopeful going forward, because as of right now, it looks as if interest rates are coming down, and these interest rates are hurting that low end. I mean, right now, I believe we're looking at least a 125 basis points, maybe 100. The market's indicating about 140 basis points of where the interest rates would come down, and I think that's going to really create a situation where by lowering adjustable rate mortgages, by lowering costs on financing your car, lowering a number of other expenses, that's going to help bring the economy back in a more broad sense as opposed to just a top end sense.
Listen to you, Derek Stevens. You need to join us on our next Fed special. This is actually fascinating to hear you cut this all up. Lastly, I'm just curious, what's going to happen tonight? You got a big night here, Eagles, Cowboys. I'm guessing that the pool's going to be full. Circa Swim, by the way, if you haven't, this is what I was referring to. It's a massive swimming pool. They have like a 40-foot tall HD screen that somehow, Derek, you can see in the light of day. I still don't understand how that possibly works. But you've got an incredible amount of money here in the Circa Survivor pool. It's over $16 million. What's the crowd going to be like tonight, and how important is football season for your business?
Oh, it's going to be crazy. This is a great day. Stadium Swim is our rooftop location. It's a 143-foot diagonal screen. Jointly developed with Daktronics, publicly traded company. They did a great job, and with their help, we make sure that there's no glare and you can always see it clearly, whether it's day or night. We'll have about 5,000 people out at Stadium Swim, and it's completely sold out. It's been sold out for weeks now. And then within the casino, within Circa, we've got the world's largest sports book. That's an inside venue, and that's completely sold out as well. So we're very excited about that. When you talk about our football contests, I just can't believe how much demand there are for football contests. Last year, we had 2 football contests, and we had a total of $20 million worth of entries. They were $1,000 to enter. They were called Circa Million and Circa Survivor, and we had $20 million of entries. We still have 2 days to go. Those 2 contests plus our new contest called Circa Grandissimo, which is a $100,000 entry fee contest. These numbers are going crazy. We may have in excess of $30 million of entries into our football contest. And the way it works is you have to show up in Nevada. So that just adds to a little bit of Nevada tourism.
Well, this is why we're talking about this legislation. This is big business, big money. And Derek Stevens is right in the middle of it. From Circa, the D, and the Golden Gate, it's really a pleasure to have you with us here. When producer James comes out there, you got to help him get one of those couches at the stadium.
I will. Oh, no question about it. We, you know a guy. We'll be able to help out. No problem.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.